Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Thursday afternoon. It's been a few days since we recorded. It was a busy weekend as far as podcasts go. So we decided we were going to wait it out a little bit longer than we have been before coming back on and getting into quite a bit. There's been a lot with the Georgia Bulldogs this week in terms of the transfer portal. Jaylen Walker bringing home the Butkus Award. We will be sure to get into that. We'll recap the win over Texas, some of the other roster stuff that is going on, as well as the 2025 schedule being released for the Georgia Bulldogs. But, guys, I want to make sure for the folks who listen to the podcast, when we recorded our last episode on Sunday, I gave a brief update just based on what Kirby Smart had said on Sunday about Carson Beck. Now, there's two injury situations we need to talk about, and it starts with Carson. Georgia put out a statement. I think that was on Monday. All these days run together now with the transfer portal fired up, that Carson and his family were seeking treatment options for that elbow injury to his throwing arm, but that a timeline for his return is not available at this point. They don't know when Carson will be back, but he is working to come back with hopes of playing again this season. So, guys, I want to let you guys talk about this a little bit, and I'll just start with saying something I put on the Junkyard after this statement was put out, that, there's no harm in Carson Beck leaving the door open for a return. I think it's going to be a situation where, he sees what he can do to treat this injury. He sees if he can feel better in the next few weeks. Georgia's got, I think, a little under 3 weeks before the Sugar Bowl as we're recording this on Thursday. Give him some time to try to treat it, reassess the injury, and if he can play, then, you go with that. If he can't, well, then there was no harm done in trying to rehab it and just see where you can get with it. It doesn't, to me, do Georgia a ton of good to go ahead and rule him out and say, yeah, he can't play. Just see what your starting quarterback is able to do physically and see if they can get something figured out. Kipp, what do you make of the news about Carson Beck again? They're leaving the door open, trying to find treatment options with the hope that number 15 will be back this season.
I would say the door's cracked open, but, I mean, it's as barely as possible, in my opinion. I think, we don't even know exactly what grade the injury is, but let's just assume it's a grade 1, because if it's a grade 2 or 3, I don't think we're having this conversation at all. So on the most aggressive side possible, with all of us becoming experts in elbow and shoulder injuries over the last week, I would say 4 weeks is probably as aggressive as you can possibly get, which would be the Sugar Bowl on January 1st. But I'm not talking about playing. I'm just talking about, the fact that he might be able to return to some sort of activity. Like, that's when it's probably technically healed. Now, he's going to have the best resources possible at Georgia to be able to get to that point. But I think talking about him with the Sugar Bowl is probably just being, as optimistic as possible. And him playing again for Georgia is probably not far behind. And I think when you start thinking about his considerations for the NFL draft, which now I can't even believe we'd be even considering the possibility of him potentially coming back next season. But that's probably a conversation that's being had as well, is where's my draft grade now? Is it being affected by this? I haven't had the season I expected. That being said, I still expect him to go to the NFL draft. And so I think that just has to come, in mind here, is he might have an opportunity to improve his stock at the scouting combine. And, there's might be more for him to lose than gain by trying to come back earlier than he needs to. So as of now, I don't expect to see Carson Beck throw another pass for Georgia. But again, the door is open for the possibility if they get to, the national championship, he has a little bit more time. But it still doesn't seem likely, in my opinion.
No, I'm right there with you, Kipp. I think it's one of those things where it's going to take something significant as far as him rehabbing this injury. And I wrote about this a few days ago, how much more valuable has this first round bye become for Georgia in that they're going to get Gunnar Stockton ready? And just think if they didn't have quite as much time, I think it would have been, maybe 11, 10 days fewer if they made the playoff, but did not have that first round bye. I mean, that's significant time to try to get a first time starter ready. Ben, what do you make of the Carson Beck talk? The fact that the door is cracked open, as Kipp said, and they're just going to see what they can do in the time allotted.
Well, I'm not surprised that there's maybe some gray areas to what could happen for multiple reasons. One, I think that Carson Beck doesn't want his Georgia career to be over. Like, I think that he sees the opportunity that's out there for this Georgia football team, and he wants to be a part of that. And so he wants to hold out hope. I also think that Kirby Smart wants there to be as much gray area as possible, because you're looking at very rarely does Georgia have two quarterbacks that are so different from one another. And that if you're preparing for Georgia, you have to game plan for them so differently than you would one versus the other. And so I think, of course, Kirby Smart wants to keep that sort of unknown out there. And I think that it benefits Georgia, and that just makes sense from a gamesmanship standpoint. I do think that Carson Beck is going to do everything that he possibly can to try to be ready at some point during this playoff. Now, I think that just based on the typical recovery times, anybody that's played baseball and dealt with a UCL injury knows how fragile an injury like this can be. Like, I don't think the Sugar Bowl is a realistic aiming point for him. And so for me, it's a weird conversation to have, because Georgia's got to beat a playoff team and win a football game probably without Carson Beck, regardless of whether he's able to recover in time for the Orange Bowl or the national championship if those games were to happen. And so, I obviously hope for Carson Beck that he's able to make his full recovery as fast as possible. I'm not very optimistic, just given that injury, the position that he plays, the stress that's going to be on that elbow. I don't think that it's realistic. And I don't even know with what he's going to be able to give you, whether it is enough for what Gunnar Stockton's going to be able to do the way that he plays the quarterback position. So again, it goes back to what we've said already. It's incredibly poor timing for Georgia for a number of reasons. And, the most of which being they don't even necessarily know exactly what offense they're going to need to put forward for certain games for the rest of this playoff run.
Ben hit on a big thing for me, the gamesmanship of this. I would be shocked, honestly, if we ever get word before the Sugar Bowl that he is officially out, and especially so if it comes from Georgia. I think they're going to leave that guessing game out there, but I would be shocked if he sees it. But as Ben said, I do think sincerely he's going to do everything he can to play, because he came back to win an SEC championship, to win a national championship after Georgia missed it last year, and it didn't happen. And now Georgia is on the doorstep of that. I think, as we talked on Sunday on that podcast, that it sets up well for Georgia, just where they have the seeding and the teams they'd have to face. But it's going to be an uphill battle for Carson to play, and we will keep you guys in the loop as far as what he's doing to make it happen. All right, another key injury that I think got a little bit overshadowed with the Carson Beck news was that Georgia is losing punter Brett Thorson to a season-ending knee injury. It was an injury to his non-kicking leg. He tried to make a tackle on a punt return. I think that was in the third quarter of the SEC title game. Winds up getting hurt on the play. Big loss for Georgia. A Ray Guy Award finalist, a guy that actually won the Ray Guy Award fan vote this week, as we wait for the actual award to be passed out. Huge loss for Georgia. They're going to be turning over to true freshman Drew Miller, who is a very good punter of his own right, but he's a true freshman, and he's never played for Georgia, was not dressed out for the game in the SEC title game, and he was actually watching from the stands, if I understand that correctly, which is why Charlie Hamm was back there as the punter on the fake punt. That Arian Smith wound up getting the ball and keeping that drive alive. So, Ben, what do you think about the Brett Thorson loss, and then the Drew Miller piece of this, having a guy that was the number one punter in his recruiting class, and now he's going to make his Georgia debut in a quarterfinals game?
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up for me, because Kirby Smart sort of confused me earlier this week when he was talking about who was back there, who was going to be back there. And I honestly didn't know the Drew Miller not being dressed out for that game dynamic, which helps make a lot of sense out of it. I'll say this. I mean, I obviously got to cover Drew Miller's recruitment, and I didn't ever go see him play, but this is a guy that played high school quarterback. This is a really good athlete. He played multiple sports. I think he averaged like 51.5 yards per punt his senior year of high school. So, I mean, this is a guy that has extreme hang time. Georgia went out nationally, tried to find the best punter that they thought existed in the 2025 recruiting class, or 2024 recruiting class, rather. And they really liked him. They didn't know what Brett Thorson's eligibility situation was going to be at the time. If you remember, Brett Thorson was sort of going through some things this offseason, figuring out how many years of NCAA eligibility he actually had left. And so because of that, Georgia wanted to get out in front of it and get a punter on its roster sooner rather than later. It looked for a long time like Drew Miller probably wasn't going to have much impact in year one. That's no longer the case. I mean, Georgia's now going from a team that basically did not allow punts for the last 2 years, allow punt returns for the last 2 years, to now we don't, sort of like the quarterback position, we don't really know what to expect. There's so much more unknown with that element of the game than there has been. I think it's a crazy combination, just knowing that, theoretically, I don't think that there's any evidence to suggest this is going to be the case. But theoretically, if you go from your starting quarterback to your backup quarterback in the playoffs, you're probably going to be punting more moving forward than you have in the past. We don't know whether that will be the case or not. But I mean, it just, basic thoughts would make me think that would be the case. And so it seems like there will be more of a onus on Drew Miller than there maybe would have been on Brett Thorson had he been in this situation with Carson Beck at quarterback. And so interesting dynamic. Stinks for Brett. I mean, you just hate to. He's obviously one of the more liked guys in the state of Georgia right now. Probably he's someone that I feel like I don't know how. I'm not good with laws and stuff like that, but I feel like he could run for public office in Georgia and win pretty convincingly. So I think it's tough luck for him, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, like I said, this is a team that has not given up. I think Texas might be the only team that's returned any punts, but I think Georgia Tech might have been able to return one, but I think Texas is basically the only team that's been able to return punts on Georgia in the last 2 years. So we'll see if that stays going forward. We'll see if it's a punter thing or maybe it's a gunner thing. I know that, not to confuse Gunner with Gunner Stockton, but an Arian Smith and Dom Lovett thing.
Yeah, Tennessee too, which was when Brett Thorson had that big tackle, I should say. But yeah, the returns have been few and far between. Someone asked about Drew Miller if he was also from Australia. No, he's from, I think it's Mediapolis, Iowa. He's an Iowa guy, which shocked me that the Iowa Hawkeyes, as much as they punt, were not all over Drew Miller.
He was a legit quarterback too. Like he was a guy that they would throw 30 times a game, throw for 300 yards on a regular basis, ran around a lot. Like he wasn't just a punter playing quarterback. Like he was their quarterback.
Yeah, I'm probably going to watch the fake every single time he walks out there during the postseason. Kipp, what do you think about the Brett Thorson loss? Drew Miller stepping in, just what it means for Georgia's special teams.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you lose a finalist, for the Ray Guy Award, it's kind of a big hit. But as Ben just said, I mean, now looking back, Kirby showing that fake punt. I mean, I guess he knew this was coming, because now you have a legit fake punt threat at any time. And I think I actually think Georgia had him throw. So they actually wanted to see what he can do when they were evaluating him. So that's part of what he's bringing to the table. And his senior stats were pretty ridiculous. I think similar to Georgia, he only had like 5 return yards allowed his senior season as a punter, which, I mean, again, talking about punting stats, which I think is probably a first as far as high schoolers are concerned on this show. But anytime you average over 47 net yards, I mean, that means that this is a punter who also sets his gunners up really well at the high school level. Anytime you can do that. So this is why he came to Georgia, extremely talented, but expecting him just to go out there and perform at the same level as Brett Thorson is probably, or it's asking a little bit too much. And for Brett, I mean, he had to ask for that, this year of eligibility. He had to get that waiver. And I correct me if I'm wrong, I think he actually found out he had 2 years of eligibility.
I think so, yeah.
So, I mean, now you start thinking, okay, is he going to be able to continue his career? Will he be able to return from this injury for next year? Because, I mean, this is a career that you obviously want to see continue to happen. He has the ability to punt at the next level as well. So we're not sure really what his future holds, but just for Georgia in this situation, I mean, having two really high caliber players hurt right before the playoffs is it's kind of new territory. And so, like you said, the bye couldn't have come at a better time, and they're going to know what they have, and Kirby's going to have his sheet to know, when this is a good situation to bring Drew Miller out for the first time. I mean, maybe now the percentages go up to whether Hinani goes for it on fourth down or not in certain situations. So it's a new dynamic and storyline, and we really didn't have any shortage of storylines heading into the playoffs, but these injuries unfortunately added a couple new wrinkles.
And like I said, stay glued to Dogs 24/7. If we hear more stuff on Carson Beck, we will let you guys know there. Want to rewind to that game on Saturday afternoon, Georgia's 22-19 win over Texas. On Friday, I will have my rewatch story. I've gotten some good notes and put it together, getting ready to wrap up the week with that. Wanted to let all of us have an opportunity to talk about that game some more. And I'm going to start with an open question to either one of y'all, because this was brought up during the broadcast, and it, to me, spoke volumes about what was the issue with the offense. Can either of you guys tell me how many passes to wide receivers Carson Beck completed in the first half against Texas?
Feels like a low number, so I'll just say 3.
Yeah, I was going to say lower than that, because I'm thinking 1 to Dylan Bell. Was it only 1?
It was 1 pass to wide receivers. Now, obviously I'm excluding tight ends and running backs, but my God, this wide receiver room just has got to step it up. And now we're talking about a situation where you don't have your starting quarterback. Now, I thought those tight ends were huge. I still can't get over the Lawson Lucky catch. I have no idea how he got a foot down on that. Oscar Delp was huge in overtime. And even before Carson got hurt, I really like what Ben Urosic showed. So to me, keep those tight ends involved. Wide receivers got to step up. We talked about this on Saturday. You might as well just take deep shots with Arian Smith, because he's got a 50% chance on a curl, and he's got a 50% chance on a 40-yard bomb. So just take deep shots with him, because he's unreliable. He's not going to make those catches. Kirk Herbstreit was beside himself trying to describe what Arian was trying to do. He kept jumping for the ball when it was like getting to him, and you could tell Kirk Herbstreit was very confused what was happening there. Flipping over the defense, a guy that I think has not gotten enough love for his play, Warren Brinson, played outstanding in that game against Texas, and I think he's had a good string of games to end the regular season in the SEC title game. Chaz Chambliss played really well. Michael Williams had some big plays. CJ Allen has done a really good job of deflecting passes in like the last 3 or 4 weeks. It seems like he gets to them. I thought CJ was a lot better in coverage. I thought that he got picked on a little bit. I think that might have been the Georgia Tech game. They did a very good job of finding him and making plays there. Elsewhere, Chaz Chambliss, very impressive. Damon Wilson coming through as a pass rusher. Dalen Everett did a really good job again, as we talked about. Daniel Harris, I thought held his own, because they were very clearly picking on him. Should have had an interception that might have been a pick 6. But on the whole, the defense was very impressive. The offense found enough, especially with Gunner in the game. I thought that Mike Bobo did a very good job of calling the offense, trying to get him settled. And I thought, it was hard, and it took more than 4 quarters, but Georgia found a way to get it done. I'll start with you, Ben. Does anything stick out with you a few days removed from this game? What Georgia did, how they were able to win this one?
Well, first and foremost, and this is more forward-looking too, Georgia's going to be able to run the football better if Gunnar Stockton is at quarterback, and that is just the nature of what the attention he's going to draw from the linebackers. And so because of that, Trevor Etienne, Nate Frazier, I think if they're healthy and they're ready to go, I mean, that duo is going to look a lot like Georgia running backs of old. And we haven't seen a whole lot of that this year, because we haven't seen Etienne really since Nate Frazier has gotten acclimated and comfortable with everything the way that he has. And so I think those two guys really excelled in the second half. I think that the offensive line probably got called out at halftime and said, hey, you're going to have to be the difference here. And I think that they were in that second half on the moments that Georgia was moving the football on the ground, especially in overtime. I think the offensive line deserves a lot of the credit there. A couple guys that I think maybe had some moments that could have gotten overlooked in my rewatch that I thought were really big moments. I mean, Raylan Wilson, I thought had an awesome game early. He had a couple of tackles for loss early in that game that I thought set the tone early in drives that kind of showed Texas, hey, you might have been running the ball on teams over the last few weeks. That's not going to be happening here tonight. I think that Raylan Wilson deserves a lot of credit for what he did early in that game, especially. KJ Bolden had a tackle in overtime on that third down that if he does not make that tackle, Texas probably scores a touchdown on that play. And I think that sometimes small moments like that feel small because the play was just made the way that it was supposed to be made, get overlooked. But as a freshman, being in that situation, there's a lot of defensive backs that are not going to stuff their head in there and make a tackle the way that they need to. KJ Bolden's probably going to weigh 15, 20 pounds more by the end of his college career than he does right now, yet he's going to step up and make a play. He's a football player. I thought that was a big-time moment. And then Arian Smith catches a lot of flack. The more I've gone back and watched that game a couple times now, Arian Smith finding a way to recover that fumble from Nate Frazier, you could make the case was the play of the game. And for all the backlash that he gets, warranted in some cases for drops, for maybe not running routes at the depth that quarterbacks want them to, whatever the situation may be at times, him recovering that fumble might have saved Georgia's season because Georgia needs that extra week as much as anybody else if they're going to be playing a quarterback that has not been their starting quarterback all year long to get healthy as much as they can heading into that Sugar Bowl. And so, I think that Arian Smith deserves a helmet sticker for, making that play because I don't know how honestly, that one and Anthony Evans recovering his own fumble, I don't know how Georgia recovered either of those, let alone both of them.
I wanted to mention, too, this was brought up on the ABC broadcast. Georgia, after that Frazier fumble that Arian Smith recovered, 20 fumbles this year and have only lost 5. Talk about how lucky you are that you've only lost 5 of 20 fumbles. I mean, ball security has been an issue for this team. Another play, Ben, that I thought of when you're talking about like the plays that happen and you kind of forget about them. Lawson Lucky's tackle on the Gunnar Stockton interception, because watching it live, that interception happened right in front of us. And when it got picked, I'm looking like, oh, he's got a convoy. Like he's got a real shot to return it. And Lawson gets over there, makes a tackle. And watching the broadcast back, you see Steve Sarkisian see the play and you see him recognize, oh, he's got room. And then how quickly it's like, oh, well, he got tackled. Like you could see his face go from, we're about to have a pick 6. I mean, that was huge. Lawson made a huge play there. Kipp, what about you? What other things stood out? What sort of sticks with you from this game a few days removed?
Honestly, I'm still just thinking back to how this team just picked its play up for Gunnar Stockton. The fact that, just another adversity the team was facing coming out just with one of the most putrid halves of offensive football you'll ever see. And you have a quarterback coming in for the first time for his first series snaps. And I mean, they just all, supported him and picked up their own play around him, including the offensive line. I just think you guys mentioned, the interception. I mean, that Dylan Fairchild just getting that ball, in the chaos that happened when Beck was hurt. I thought, we were watching the play and it just looked ridiculous. Just ridiculous things were happening. But those are the kind of things where you get that one little crease and all of a sudden, Texas finds a way to take that thing back for a touchdown. So I thought that was kind of a sneaky moment where him just getting that ball in the chaos and keeping Texas from scoring points were big. But I just think it goes back to how big was the Trevor Etienne transfer. I mean, we're going to talk plenty of transfer portal and just how it's, kind of made life different for us covering it for fans. But, a Florida transfer came in, missed a lot of time, and then just put this offense on his back and said, guys, I'll take care of this, and got Georgia by on his own. And so, we talked to him after the game. We had stories on it. But I just think looking back, like he was the difference in this game and the difference in this Georgia offense where we're talking about pass catchers after pass catcher, just, with the drops and leading the country in drops and the run game being the worst it's been under Kirby Smart. He just comes in and just gives them a jolt. And so I think going into the playoffs, that is the great comfort, the great safety net for a new quarterback, having a run game. And so you have a time for Trevor Etienne to get healthy. It could be all the difference. And it was all the difference in that game where every single yard mattered. I think Trevor Etienne was arguably the biggest difference in why Georgia won that game when we were talking about whether Georgia was going to be able to stop Texas's improved run game. They did that, and then Trevor Etienne came up big when they needed him to. So looking back, it's just he's arguably the team MVP, and he hasn't even, he missed so much time. So I just think that maybe says a lot about the offense and as an indictment of this offense that we were talking about, whether they were going to score over 40 points, whether this is going to be more explosive offense this season. In the end, it was a running back that missed a lot of time that arguably had the biggest impact.
Yeah, I thought it was big after the game. Kirby Smart, Dalen Everett was named MVP, and Kirby essentially said all credit to Dalen, but that Trevor Etienne should have been the MVP with how he played. And, Jaylen Walker, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes, talked about that they really wanted to win that SEC title game for a number of reasons, but Trevor Etienne, who spoke to the team and talked about how much it meant to be on that stage, they wanted to win it for him, and Trevor came through, and Georgia does not win that game if Trevor Etienne does not contribute the way he did. I feel very strongly about that. We're going to take a quick break, talk about Jaylen Walker bringing home a big individual award, transfer portal, Georgia's 2025 schedule, some signing day superlatives from, I guess that was a week ago. I can't even remember what year we're in at this point, and then some UGA men's basketball talk, but we'll take it for a quick break first. All right, guys, let's give a shout out to Jaylen Walker, who brought home the Butkus Award as the nation's top linebacker. To this point, 13 games in, 57 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He becomes the third Georgia linebacker in the Kirby Smart era to win the award, along with Roquan Smith and Nakobe Dean. Looked like they surprised Jaylen with the award. It looked like with a team meeting, they were able to come in, and you could tell how much that award meant to him when he spoke afterwards. And cool to see Glenn Schumann tweet essentially that this was one of the goals that they talked about for Jaylen when he was in high school, and he's able to bring home this very prestigious award. Ben, what did you think about Jaylen being named the Butkus Award winner and just what he's meant for Georgia this year?
Well, I don't know about you. Were you all a little surprised when you saw the notification that he had won it? I mean, it's not that I don't think he's deserving. I mean, I think that he's had an unbelievable year. It's just it wasn't something I was expecting to happen. I didn't think that Jaylen Walker was going to win the Butkus Award this year. I mean, he's such a dynamic playmaker at the linebacker position. It's not surprising. And I think in big games this year, he's showed up. And so I think that a lot of people have seen him make some of those big time plays and big time moments. And that's a reason why, he was elevated above some other linebackers in this class. He also is just different than some of these other linebackers. I mean, even at Georgia, there's not really a linebacker that is like him. I think some people might not even consider him just a linebacker necessarily in the true sense of the word because of how dynamic of a pass rusher he is. And so I think he's even called himself at times like a defensive playmaker or something along those lines that sort of deviates away from being called a linebacker specifically. So deserving from the amount of plays that he's made and I think just psychological impact he has on this defense to know that There's not a ton of pass rush coming from a bunch of different places. And the fact that you're getting that from the linebacker position tells you a lot about him. He's obviously one of the biggest team leaders as well. I think we saw, the way that he speaks about this team after they win last week, I think he encapsulated just like the identity of what Kirby Smart wants this Georgia team and defense to be. Like Jaylen Walker is that. I think that played a big part of that. There's also probably a bit of a legacy component to it. He's a Georgia linebacker. Glenn Schumann, as he, showed yesterday, like they create Butkus Award winners at Georgia. That's what they do. And Jaylen Walker's just the next one in line. And I know that Georgia's got a really, really big 2026 linebacker that they really, really, really want, that they're going to love being able to flaunt the Butkus Award to for the next year.
Absolutely. Kipp, what do you think about Jaylen getting this award? Make sure you unmute and tell us what you think.
I had the Tyler Atkinson profile pulled up because I was about to mention, man, there's a player at Grayson. It feels like maybe Glenn Schumann was trying to talk directly to another player when he posts on social media. It also feels like maybe he's had this conversation in the past. Like maybe he's tweeted about, Roquan Smith and Nakobe Dean winning the award when Jaylen Walker was a prospect. I think he has a blueprint, and why wouldn't he? Between him and Todd Hartley, guys winning their, these positional awards, it helps to get the next guys in. And so I think the foundation was set, and we don't know how long Glenn Schumann's going to be at Georgia, but I think for this next recruiting cycle, that was a moment that it's going to make for an easy sell. And I mean, yeah, for Jaylen Walker, we've talked all season about how he's the heart and soul of the team. So if they're giving him an award for just, being the embodiment of Georgia, earning the number 2 seed, I mean, we've seen worse things happen with people having to make decisions on, whether it be awards or, even college football playoff rankings. Not knowing really in depth how well the other finalists have played, I could say that we can't be completely shocked because we thought, Jaylen Walker was the X factor of this defense going into the season when we made our predictions. When we're talking about tackles for loss, I said, like, this is the guy that's probably going to have double-digit tackles for loss, and here we are. And then 100%, that's a pat on the back moment. But I think he was the James Cook of the defense, where it's like, how are we going to figure out how to use him? How are we going to figure out how to use him? And we saw it in last year in the bowl game where the coaching staff was like, we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable and figure out how to keep him on the field. And they did that. And, yeah, now he's the Butkus Award winner because he's the most electric player on your defense. And he's the guy that is all over the field, whether it's in the backfield, just making big play after big play, but also elevating the play of his teammates. And when Kirby Smart's looking for leaders, he knew he found one early on in Jaylen Walker, and he just let him take over being the voice in that locker room. And I think that's really what's helped Georgia through all of its mostly self-created adversity this season.
You talk about Jaylen Walker, and we talked about Trevor Etienne earlier. Trevor, good case to be offensive MVP. I feel very confident Jaylen Walker is your defensive MVP just with what he's done all season. He very much deserves that honor. And, kudos to him. He's always been a great interview, but he's been a heck of a player for Georgia. Well, guys, we are in the midst of, I don't know if y'all believe this. This is still just the first week of the transfer portal. The portal opened on Monday. Looking at it from Georgia's perspective to this point, only 3 Georgia players are in the portal. You have Julian Humphrey, who left the team before the SEC title game. Michael Jackson, who announced the night of the SEC title game. Don't love that look, Michael. And then Jamal Jarrett, who I'm not sure as we're recording this on Thursday afternoon if he is officially in. So keep an eye out because there's already been a case of a guy saying he's going to go in and not. And one of the big wins to this point for Georgia, Nitro Tuggle, staying put. I think that bodes really well. Keeping a really talented freshman receiver, especially because I think there were going to be some significant suitors. Maybe one of the teams Georgia is going to play in the Sugar Bowl might have been looking at the Indiana native. So I want to ask you guys, we're not going to get into a ton of intel because that's what Dogs 24/7 is for. But I do want to get y'all's thoughts on how things are shaping up for Georgia. And I'll start with you, Ben. Has anything intrigued you to this point when it comes to Georgia and the transfer portal? Anything that maybe you weren't expecting, or just things that you're interested in seeing as these next few weeks go by?
Well, not anything that surprises me necessarily, but I mean, you bring up Nitro Tuggle. I mean, I think a big reason why he's was originally considering looking elsewhere is because Georgia just brought in 5 wide receivers. And I don't think that Georgia is done yet in terms of what it's going to try to do with incoming transfers. And we've already, reported at Dogs 24/7, a couple of guys that are probably going to take visits to Georgia. Georgia's not locks or guarantees to get any, I'll just call them out. Georgia Tech wide receiver Eric Singleton, Kentucky wide receiver Dane Key. I don't think Georgia's a lock or guarantee to get either or both of them. I think that Georgia is going to be in the mix in those transfer portal recruitments. I think that what is clear is that Georgia is going to try and add and upgrade at wide receiver. I think that we've already seen in the past, Georgia went to the portal for Colby Young and Ra Thomas. They were looking for big body, one-on-one, 50-50 ball type of receivers. Georgia doesn't have a lot of that on its roster right now. I think that it's going to want to look that direction this portal cycle as well. I think that Dane Key fits that really well. I think that, CJ Daniels is a wide receiver from LSU. I don't know how much, traction Georgia's going to end up having with him, but he's another guy that sort of fits that. So I think any wide receiver that has experience and proven productivity that sort of fits that build will probably get a look from Georgia. Now, does that mean Georgia's a lock to get them? No, but I think that for me moving forward is going to be who are going to be the impact wide receivers out of the portal that Georgia has a chance to bring in, because I firmly believe if Georgia brings in 1 to 2 guys, and I'd probably lean 2 guys at wide receiver right now through the portal. If Georgia brings in 2 guys into the portal, you can bet that those 2 guys are going to be, top 4 or 5 receivers for this Georgia offense next season. Like Georgia is going to be immediately asking for whatever they're doing to impact this offense, because Georgia just doesn't have those types of playmakers at the receiver position. And a lot of those guys that do have that are going to be that incoming freshman group who I don't think that you can lean on right away.
Kipp, what about you? Has anything caught your attention with Georgia when it comes to the transfer portal to this point?
I mean, we knew that Georgia was going to try to get, some help at wide receiver. They'll probably try to get 2 guys. And I think Dane Key really fits that mold as an ex receiver who, based on the last couple of seasons, has a very low drop rate and hasn't played with great quarterback play, we could say, for the last couple of seasons. So would be an outstanding pickup if that happens. Defensive tackle, we've talked about that as far as, it making sense that Georgia wants to get better depth, and they know they're going to lose some guys there. So Travis Shaw at North Carolina makes a lot of sense as a guy going into the portal that Georgia would take a long look at, regardless of what happens with Ja Jarrett. And I also want to point out that we still are going to have a spring portal window. So I'm sure that Nitro Tuggle looked at it and said, it's only a 10-day portal window, but, I can reevaluate this thing if it doesn't look like, I'm going to get the looks that maybe I feel I'm deserving of. So they don't have these guys locked in yet, but, that was definitely a big win. The thing that really is just intriguing to me is how the Carson Beck injury affected Georgia at the quarterback position when it comes to the portal, because we're talking about the possibility for Georgia to get the best eval it could possibly look for at the quarterback position, but also we have a portal window as far as guys going in that's right now in December, and a lot of these quarterbacks are probably not going to wait to see how Georgia does in the playoffs to make a decision. And so it kind of makes it, just not the best scenario for Georgia. They, with them offering quarterbacks like the Cal quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, that would definitely be a guy that Georgia will look at. And then you have Michael Van Buren from Mississippi State. Georgia knows firsthand what he's capable of. They would love to have those guys in the roster, but are those guys going to go thinking, well, if Gunnar Stockton just balls out in the playoff, then this isn't a situation where I'm going to get a fair shot at playing time. They're going to know who their quarterback is. And, I think we all assumed that he was going to be the odds-on favorite anyway. So how does Georgia navigate the transfer portal quarterback, knowing that they don't have the strongest selling point for playing time right now? I think it's going to be really tough for them to get one of those kind of guys. But it looks like they're trying. And for me, that just intrigues me, because what if you land a guy that's a bona fide starter and then, Gunner leads them to a title? Like, what the dynamic there is fascinating to me. And I think it's always true at the quarterback position, right?
I did want to pose that question to you, Ben. Just what do you make of what Georgia's done to this point, looking at quarterbacks, kind of kicking the tires? We know they offered Deshaun Purdy from Charlotte, who's not quite at the caliber of some of those guys that Georgia has been linked to at this point. Mendoza, as Kipp mentioned, from Cal, being one of the primary ones. What do you think of what Georgia is looking to do at quarterback when it comes to the portal? Ben.
Sorry, I thought I was on mute. That was worse than actually not being on mute. I think Kipp's nailed it with the quarterback position. Like, it's a bad spot, not a bad spot to be in. It's just a tough spot to be in. I mean, Gunnar Stockton is your quarterback for a playoff run that you have to win games at, and you want to attract guys to play that position, but you also need Gunnar Stockton to be the guy for this playoff run. And so I don't know what you have to, I don't know what you sell to these transfer portal options while also selling to your team to buy in to the quarterback that they have. I mean, it's just a bad spot. I think that they're probably going to go the right route and, take a look at some guys. We saw them offer the Charlotte quarterback transfer last night. And so I think, you might look for less experienced, younger options. You might try and get some class separation with Puglisi if you can, just to try and spread out that quarterback room a little bit as well. But I don't think that Georgia's in a spot where they're going to come over the top and recruit a quarterback that is going to be the clear-cut starter over the top of Gunnar Stockton, because I think, one, it's going to be hard to do that just with the time that he's had at Georgia. But two, given what this next month now looks like for Gunnar Stockton, I don't know how you can, do that in good faith without, looking a little bit like, hey, we're trying to upgrade at the quarterback position.
Yeah, it's going to be sort of a tough needle to thread. And I feel like if Georgia is truly going to go after these quarterbacks, they have to just, the most honest pitch they can give is come compete for the job. They can't guarantee anything because, like we're saying, if Gunnar goes and wins a national title, I don't think that you just lock it up and say Gunnar can do no wrong and this is his job. But if he does that, he's very clearly going to be QB1 going into spring.
Yeah, well, and if Gunnar Stockton wins the national championship as Georgia's quarterback, like, he's going to be Georgia's quarterback next year, whether that is a real competition or not, like whatever that looks like Gunnar Stockton's going to be Georgia's quarterback if he goes on this run and wins the SEC championship game and 3 college football playoff games. And those are the only 4 games that he's played meaningful snaps in. Like, there will be no justifiable reason to go with anybody else. And whether or not that, is the best for 2025 or not, I have no idea. I haven't seen Gunnar Stockton nearly enough to be able to say. And quite frankly, I haven't seen probably enough of these quarterback transfer options to be able to say either. Many of them outside of Fernando Mendoza, like Kipp said, haven't had a ton of run to be able to say one way or the other.
Stay glued to dogs247.com. We will have the latest on the portal as Georgia goes after some of these guys, and especially once it becomes clear that these guys are going to become Bulldogs. All right, guys, there was news from the SEC on Wednesday night with the release of all 16 team schedules, Georgia among them, obviously. Going to go through this. Now, we knew the non-conference games already, but just for the big picture, I will go through it. Georgia's going to open the season at home against Marshall. Then it will host Austin Peay. Week 3 at Tennessee. Bye week in week 4. Week 5 hosting Alabama. Week 6 hosting Kentucky. Week 7 at Auburn. Week 8 hosting Ole Miss. Week 9 bye week. Week 10, Florida and Jacksonville. That will be the last game in Jacksonville for a couple years. Week 11 at Mississippi State. Week 12 hosting Texas. Week 13 hosting Charlotte. And then Week 14 against Georgia Tech in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now, I wrote about this on Thursday. On the whole, I think this schedule looks really good for Georgia. Still some tough games. Tough for whoever winds up being this quarterback in 2025. Week 3 at Tennessee, a Tennessee team that's got high expectations. But on the whole, knowing the SEC teams that were going to be on the schedule, just not the order these games were going to be played, I think this is pretty favorable for Georgia, and it's certainly the best home slate that I'd say at least in the last decade. It is a heck of a home slate. I'll start with you, Kipp. Did you have any big takeaways from how Georgia's 2025 schedule came together? Did anything in particular stand out to you?
I mean, it was very convenient for the SEC to just blow out the ratings battle and then just hit copy paste, and just flip the switch. And I think that they lucked out. It was a lazy setup because they didn't want to figure out a long-term answer. So let's just do this. For Georgia, yeah, I mean, it's the same schedule. And for students and for season ticket holders, yes, this bodes very well. You get to see some important games in Athens. I think the SEC did a good job making sure they spread out the big games so that there's a big SEC game every week. But you can do that when you have all the TV rights. You just make sure you already know like what the 3 p.m. game is going to be, what the night game is going to be. So I think that, it does make things easier. Texas having that bye before coming to Athens, and then also knowing we just all talked about Texas having the easiest schedule in the SEC their first year. Well, I mean, we're going to be talking about the same thing a year from now probably, because guess what? They have the exact same schedule. So I think I'm more interested to see what happens after next season. I mean, what is the long-term plan here? Are you just going to flip it into where they're playing the teams that they didn't play in this 2-year block? I would hate that because I think it just sets up for this Georgia to have a very, again, lopsided schedule on the other end. It just wouldn't be a lot of, really intriguing games other than maybe we'll find out if there actually is a stadium in College Station. Like we actually can see what it's like to play at Texas A&M. But I think Georgia getting good home games and getting a chance to maybe have some more of the night games in that atmosphere instead of having to play in everybody else's night game. That's great news. And I think if Gunnar Stockton, whoever the quarterback is, it bodes well that arguably your biggest test will now be at home. So I think after that Tennessee game, getting them actually in Knoxville so early and it being warm there should overall, I mean, just help Georgia with their chance to return to Atlanta in the college football playoff.
Ben, what about you? What stood out to you about this 2025 schedule and what Georgia's going to be up against?
Well, 3 things, and I think y'all have touched on a couple of them. But I mean, one, Georgia, Tennessee being in September is a little change of pace. I think it's going to be fun. I think that Georgia's going to be going on the road that we've talked for years and years. Now that first road game of the year in the SEC is never easy. I think there's a good chance that'll be a night game, first road night game of the year in Knoxville. If there ever were a year that Josh Heupel was going to catch Kirby Smart, it feels like that's a pretty good scheduling spot for Tennessee. I'll call out the Texas game as well. I think it's interesting. Georgia, because it always has the bye before Florida, it does not have a bye the week before the Texas game. Texas does have a bye the week before the Georgia game. So Texas will be coming off a bye that week and Georgia will not be. Just an interesting little schedule wrinkle. And then to the point that y'all have made, and I think it probably is my biggest takeaway, and this is not anything that we learned last night through the scheduling because we knew who the home teams were going to be. But now that we know what the spots are on the schedule and what it's going to be. I mean, dating back to 2021, Georgia's home schedule has not been good this decade. And I mean, I can just go through it. South Carolina has been there twice. Vanderbilt's been there twice. Arkansas, Kentucky twice, Missouri twice, Auburn and Tennessee 3 times each, and then Ole Miss and Mississippi State once each. Those are the only games that have been in Sanford Stadium. That means no Alabama, no LSU, no Texas, no Oklahoma, no Texas A&M, obviously no Florida in Sanford Stadium in the 2020s. I think that is egregiously bad scheduling from the SEC standpoint, given that Georgia has been the premier program in the conference during this decade, and they haven't been hosting home games against the most perennial brands in the conference during that period of time. That's going to get changed in a big way next year. Obviously, Alabama is going to be in Sanford Stadium. This is the first time that Kirby Smart will coach against Alabama in Sanford Stadium in his Georgia head coaching career, which is remarkable given the number of matchups that they've had. I know many of those have been neutral site, but 2 of them have been in Tuscaloosa, or if two or three. I think two of them have been in Tuscaloosa. And so, I realized that things got weird with conference expansion and how they had to make certain sacrifices with the scheduling. But the fact that this will be the first time that Kirby Smart is coaching against Alabama in Sanford Stadium, and this is going to be the 10th time that he's played them as a head coach, is sort of outrageous to me. But obviously Texas coming back, I think that'll be a big one as well. So big win for the season ticket holders. I've been flying this flag for a couple of years now that what the SEC has been doing to Georgia season ticket holders is just wild, because it is the best era of Georgia football, and Georgia fans are going to go on the road. They've proven it. They'll go to road games. They'll go to neutral site games and take over stadiums. They have no problem doing that. I mean, come on. It shouldn't have taken this long in this Georgia era for Georgia to get a home schedule like this one, but I'm glad it's finally here.
Yeah, I was honestly shocked when the 2024 schedule came out that Georgia and Alabama was not in Sanford, just because the last time these two teams had played before that was in Tuscaloosa. But, Kirby spent a lot of this year talking about how hard the schedule was, but he would bring up, when conference scheduling was asked, he's like, hey, I want it to stay with the flip because I'm going to get back, what I'm deserved because of all these road games. And, as tough as this schedule was for Georgia, they went 10-2 in the regular season, and now they get all of these marquee games at home. I know it was tough, and obviously Georgia didn't get through it unbeaten, but it's going to work out well for them, I think, in 2025. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the signing day for Georgia and the very productive efforts Georgia had. Now, Georgia has the number 4 class in the nation, according to 24/7 Sports. Texas, Alabama, Oregon ahead of them. Georgia with 28 players who are coming in. And I wanted to take this opportunity because, we had that signing day podcast, but Ben did such a good job of bringing guests on. There wasn't a ton of time for us to kind of, talk about the class as a whole, hand out superlatives. And I do want to take that opportunity now to do that. And I'll throw out a few that we will each take turns with. And Ben, I'm going to start because you are the recruiting expert, with who you think is the most underrated player in this 2025 class for Georgia. Who do you think is not getting enough attention, and why do you think that they are underrated?
I was going to do some superlatives on that show. And like you said, we just had so much great time with all the guys that I didn't end up having time to do it. And I was debating at the time who I wanted to go with at this position. I'm going to go with someone that I think is as talented as anybody Georgia's got in this class, and that's Thomas Blackshear. He's I think, lowest rated, maybe second lowest rated Georgia signee, but he's a 3-star. He's not your typical 3-star. I mean, this guy is 6'2", 205, wins his one-on-one battles as well as anyone. I think that half of his catches this season at Calvary Day in Savannah went for touchdowns. I mean, this is a guy that even when they lost their state playoff game to Prince Avenue, I think the score of that game was 61-39 or something like that. I think Thomas Blackshear accounted for 2 touchdowns and 180 yards or something like that. And so this is a guy that he's tough. He's physical. I've said it before. He's going to get George Pickens comparisons. One, because of his stature and his route running ability and, his blocking and some of the things that he does on the field. He also has an edginess to him. I won't even deny it. I'll let folks know right from the beginning. He has an edginess to him that is going to draw some George Pickens comparisons. There's no doubt about that for me, but he's just someone that his playmaking is elite. I mean, I hesitate to want to say those types of things for a 3-star guy that when there are other receivers in the class that have gotten a lot more publicity, but he is a elite playmaker. His ball skills might be the best of any of the Georgia receivers that they signed. I really believe that. And he is someone that originally was not going to be enrolling early. He's working through some things right now, trying to still make it work where he might be able to enroll early. I don't want to make that a guarantee, but there is at least still an outside chance that he could do that. And if that's the case, him getting on campus earlier and being acclimated, he's someone I do think could have a first-year impact.
I'm going to go ahead and give mine and say Todd Robinson. I think that he's a guy that obviously he's going to have to adjust to life only playing safety, but he's just a football player. And Ben, when you do those future dog watches through that season, I mean, he was always a guy. Now he was playing quarterback for Valdosta and doing a lot on offense, but just always made plays. And I'm not comparing these two because they look very different, but it reminded me when I was doing Future Dog Watch every week, CJ Allen's offensive stats were just outrageous. He was taking like 30 carries for like 215 and 3 touchdowns. And it was just like, man, this guy's impressive. I really like Todd Robinson. I would hesitate to say, hey, like instant impact, but I think he's a super talented guy. And I think in time, he's going to be a very talented defensive back and a guy that's going to make an impact at Georgia. Kipp, who you got? Who stands out to you as maybe an underrated part of this class, a guy that you really like among the signees?
Well, I'm going to pick a guy that's a 4-star and rated as a top 247 prospect, but I think he's the most underrated prospect in the class, and that's Rashawn Jenkins. I just think when we look at players that fit the mold of what Kirby Smart's looking for in a DB, and when you have just such a direct comparison to arguably one of the best of the play at Georgia and Javon Bullard, I mean, Rashawn Jenkins is 100% undervalued as a 4-star and a, what is he, number 218 overall in the country. I just think that right there, like just the way that he plays the game, he may not be a Bullard, but he may end up being like a Kamari Lassiter player just because he can do everything. He just fits the role of being able to cover the run, man up and cover another team's best receiver, play the game physically, extremely athletic and, versatile, just has ball skills. I just think right there, that's just a guy that you plug into your program and know that he's a self-starter. He's just a guy that you're not going to have to go in there and convince him to eat off the floor. I think he's already eating off the floor. And that those guys, I just think those guys are always top 100 guys to me. When you just check every single one of those boxes, but you're not 6'2". Sorry, that's not an issue for me. Just bring in the 5'10", 180-pound guys every single class and know that whether it's star, safety, whatever you need this guy to play, he's just going to step right up and be ready to contribute probably multiple seasons. I just think that he has multi-season starter written all over him, and those guys should always be ranked very highly. So for whatever his ranking is, I think he's undervalued for Georgia.
Ben did a really good job of rolling out, basically emptying the notebook with the offensive signees, the defensive signees. He did that on Wednesday. I would encourage you guys to go to Dogs 24/7 and read that. Some really good intel there. All right, Ben, next question, next superlative, instant impact, which is very hard with as talented as Georgia is. But is there a guy, Ben, that stands out to you that you would say, hey, among this class, this is a guy that could have an impact sooner rather than later?
Well, I'm going to take a lazy answer because he was Georgia's most important recruit. I feel like the entire cycle, he's the number 1 rated guy that Georgia's got. And that's 5-star Elijah Griffin. I just think that when you look along this defensive line, it's hard to be a year 1 guy along the defensive line at Georgia. Elijah Griffin is exactly the type of guy that would be able to do it. He is big. He is strong. Georgia only signed 2 defensive linemen in this class, and I don't think that if any person other than Elijah Griffin was in Georgia's class, I don't think that there's a world where Georgia only signs 2 defensive linemen. I think that he was that important, and Georgia knew the immediate impact that he's going to be able to have. So I think that you also look at some of the attrition that Georgia might have with graduation and things like, and going to the draft at the 3 tech. I think that Elijah Griffin is someone that could step in early and do that. And there's a reason why he was Georgia's highest ranked guy. There's a reason why Georgia prioritized him in a way that they didn't with just about anybody else in this cycle. And I think because of that, you can expect to see Elijah Griffin very early in his Georgia career.
I think that's a really good pick, and I think that Elijah has got a very bright future. I'm going to go to receiver and say Talon Taylor, and we've seen that these receivers, it is very hard to get in the mix. I think, I'll speak for myself and say I've been a little surprised with how little we've seen Nitro Tuggle and Sokovi White this year, but I really like what we've heard about Talon Taylor. He's a guy that I was on the fence about picking as my most underrated, but I really like his playmaking ability. He strikes me as a guy that can come in, learn under James Coley, try to get his feet under him, and make an impact on a very different looking receiver room. I think that's going to be an advantage for all these guys that come in, the freshmen, any transfers Georgia adds. There's going to be a whole lot of new faces in that room, and that means opportunity for guys to break out. So I'm picking Talon Taylor. I think he's a guy that's got a chance to come in and make a pretty instant impact. Kipp, what about you? Is there a guy that stands out to you that you think can fit the mold of an instant impact?
Similar opinion, but different player. I got Landon Roldan. I just think that his skill set, we're looking right now at, again, what Georgia doesn't really have. It's just a guy that can stretch defenses, get separation. I mean, it seems to be an ongoing issue where Georgia can't find guys that can get open. And it's the reason why that regardless of his issues attacking the ball, it's why that Georgia spams the Arian Smith button, because he gets separation better than anybody else in the team. So regardless of whether or not he's going to catch it, it's still a higher percentage play for them because he might get, he might get a flag. I think Landon Roldan's just a guy that has that kind of ability to where he can get separation. It doesn't have to be a straight line, although he can do it. I mean, the guy can run, but I mean, he can get separation in the intermediate routes. Having a guy that can run crisp routes and is explosive and has that start-stop ability, I think is really, really valuable. So I think picking any receiver to come in their first year and just play the game the way Georgia wants him to is kind of asking a lot. But I do think that he's just a guy that can attack defenses in a unique way that where Georgia's like, we might have to find a way to get this guy on the field and get him a couple snaps early on in the season.
And y'all are good. I got to say, I have a note right here. It's got my day one contributors right here at the top. I had Elijah Griffin, Talon Taylor, and Landon Roldan. Good stuff, guys.
We might not know as much as you do on the recruiting trail, Ben, but we do our best. Ben, this is really my last superlative, and then I'll leave it open to you if you had any you wanted to add. But it's not so much a sort of superlative, but a chance for you to talk about some of what you've gotten to see on the recruiting trail. Do you have a favorite interaction with any of these guys from the 2025 class? Something that comes to mind that you got to see with one of these guys that kind of sticks with you as they get ready to start their Georgia career?
Man, I mean, it's hard to pick one. I mean, not to keep going with Elijah Griffin. I mean, Elijah Griffin's been awesome to just engage with. I mean, he is someone that operates like a professional. I mean, I remember this was, 3 weeks before his official visit weekend, his official visit birthday weekend trip to Georgia. I was sitting in his locker room at Savannah Christian with him and LaDamian Guyton, and we're kind of just, chopping it up about things. And there are certain guys that view like the media side of things as like, a pain in the ass, sort of part of the business side of it that they're not crazy about. And it's just, Elijah just gets it. I mean, I think that anybody who was on the signing day show saw that like he's down to come on and kind of just chop it up about anything. I think we probably had him on longer than just about anybody that we had on during that signing day show. We wish the lights would have probably stayed on in his room, but that's neither here nor there. So I mean, just all my interactions with Elijah increased the reason why I think he could be a day one contributor. I think Tyler Williams, you're gonna get a lot of answers to guys that we had on the signing day show because the relationships that I was able to build with them were a big reason why they came on that show. But I mean, Tyler Williams, I got a chance to go hang out with him down at Armwood. I was on my way down to the Future 50 at IMG Academy. And so I find out the night before that he's going to be committing to Georgia that day. And I'm on my way to Tampa. And so it's easy for me to just swing past Armwood. So I got to go hang out, with him, a couple of his teammates during his practice, got some good video content, got to get some good stuff from him about why it was Georgia. And I think, anybody who watched our signing day show last Wednesday, I mean, Tyler Williams is a sharp dude. I mean, he is a Georgia guy through and through. Like, he's someone that I could see Kirby Smart putting at the podium very, very early on in his Georgia career. So he was great. And then, I mean, I'd have to say, I didn't know it was happening at the time, but going to see Isaiah Gibson play basketball the same night that Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning were both there, one, told you how big of a prospect that Isaiah Gibson was. I think I've said that before. Like, Dan Lanning's not coming from Oregon to go watch Isaiah Gibson play basketball unless Isaiah Gibson is who he is, the way that he is. But I think that, some of those moments where you just, recruiting's a weird thing. And sometimes your schedule is just aligned with other things that are happening, and being able to sort of witness firsthand those two guys. And a basketball game visit is different. Like when these coaches go on the road and visit for these football games, they're standing on the sidelines. I don't want to say it's a political photo op, but I mean, more or less, they're going there to kind of show face, say that they were at a game, maybe bump some elbows with some coaches or whatever, but they're getting very little time with these recruits. When you go to a basketball game, I mean, it's a little bit different. For starters, the amount of time that the game's going on is different. The amount of time that you can get with them pregame, because let's just face it, Isaiah Gibson is not approaching a high school basketball game with the same mindset that he's approaching a high school football game. Basketball's fun for him. Football is what his life is going to be. And so you can sort of approach those things a little bit differently. And I think I got to witness that a little bit. And, seeing that with Isaiah Gibson was a big deal. And it showed me then, I didn't know actually at that time, a big reason why I was there was because 24/7, we're partnered with the now Navy All-American Bowl, and I was giving him his All-American Bowl invite. And that was a big reason why I was there. I didn't really know at the time just how serious of a prospect he was going to be, because he was not at that 5-star status at that point in January.
What I would say, because I have not had nearly the amount of contact that Ben has with these recruits, is from that signing day show, which again, I can't recommend watching that enough if you haven't already. I sincerely think that is the best episode we've ever done on the Junkyard Dawgcast, because those guys were so good. But Chase Linton, and it was two things. One, him retelling the story of Chidera Uzodiribe reaching out to him after that playoff loss. And he said, he was the first guy to reach out that night. And he's like, it's like 1:30 in the morning. But two, and I don't know if you clocked this at the time, Ben, when he talked about, really going silent on Chidera and leaving Chidera in the dark. And then Chase talks about when they finally talk again and Chidera's like, you played me. He sounded just like Chidera. If you've ever talked to Chidera, the impression that he did just in that little clip, I don't know if you noticed it, Ben. I was like, because I've a few years ago, I interviewed Chidera for a story. I mean, I thought it was uncanny how much Chase was able to imitate him.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to that, because I don't think I caught just how good the impression was. So I'm going to have to get that. I might even have to clip that and put that out somewhere.
Please do, because I swear, and watch my face, because I think you see me go like, oh my God, he sounded just like Chidera. But that whole show was great. And again, I couldn't encourage folks enough to watch that. All right, Georgia men's basketball minute before we get out of here. Georgia's had a little bit of a break between games since they beat Notre Dame. I think it's about an 11-day stretch, but that will end on Saturday night. They're going to be playing Grand Canyon and State Farm Arena as part of Holiday Hoops Giving. 6 p.m., that game will be on SEC Network. That is Grand Canyon, led by Bryce Drew, who was at one point Vanderbilt's head coach. 6-2, Antelope's team. That beat Stanford. I guess that was a week or two ago. But Georgia's sitting at 8-1. I think this is a great opportunity for Georgia to add another win and get a little bit closer to the end of non-conference play. I think they got a great chance to end non-con with just one loss. So big opportunity on Saturday night. All right, we've had a lot of comments back and forth in the YouTube. I would encourage y'all, if y'all ever have a chance to watch this show live, obviously do it to watch all of us. But, man, the comments just continue to entertain. And most of us are trying not to bust out laughing with what's going on there. But there was a serious question in there that I wanted to pose to Ben and to Kipp, and it was about Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick is now the head coach at North Carolina. There was talk about this. We need to shout out Inside Carolina, our 24/7 network, the North Carolina site in our 24/7 sports network, that they were on it from the beginning, that they had talked to Bill Belichick, that North Carolina was considering him. The deal gets done. He will be the head coach of the Tar Heels in 2025. And I want to get both of y'all's thoughts on it. I'll start with Kipp, because he's the NFL guy. He's the guy that I think has the best sense of this. How is this going to go? Not so much your thought, but is this going to work? How do you think the Bill Belichick situation in Chapel Hill is going to play out?
It's absolutely not going to work. There's a reason why he's taking this job. And I mean, no offense to North Carolina. I know it's impossible to say no offense without immediately offending anyone. But there's a reason why this is the job he took, and that's because the NFL said, we're done with you. Just end it, okay? Enough is enough. And the man is 72 years old and choosing to get involved with NIL, with recruiting. He's never had to recruit a player in his life. So, yeah, everyone can say, oh, everyone's going to line up to play for him. No, I've seen this before. And it's going to be NIL based. He's not going to have some recruiting prowess that makes him elite. But we've also just seen guys come. We just saw how Herm Edwards did at Arizona State, how well that went. I feel similarly about this. I feel bad for the people that he put in charge because they're going to have to carry that program on a day-to-day basis. He's not going to be putting in the time like Kirby Smart's done, to where Kirby Smart feels like he's 60 years old when he's been coaching at Georgia for 9 years. I think 3 weeks into this, Belichick's going to be like, go do this. He's going to start delegating. It's going to be up to other people to get North Carolina back on top. And I don't think it's going to happen. So I think this is, them signing up for a big name, and it's exciting. But I do not think that his NFL success is going to carry over in any sort of way to the college football level, because these are just different players in their development, and they don't have to put up with it. They can just leave. And I think the amount of transfer portal departures he has at the year one is going to be extreme. And so I think it's going to work out horribly for them, but I am still here to see it because I'm a Falcons fan, and we didn't bring in Bill Belichick, and we're still horrible, but I don't think it has anything to do with Bill Belichick. I just think it kind of shows you where he is in his coaching career, where he's thought of NFL circles. And this was basically the only gig he had left to take.
Ben, what about you? How do you see this thing playing out?
I think it's going to work, Kipp. I think it's going to work. I think I'll say this. I think it's going to work depending on what you're expecting. If you're expecting Bill Belichick to turn North Carolina into a, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State power, like that's not what I think you can expect here. But I'm not as worried about him being 72 because they just got rid of a coach that was 73. So they were sort of already in the boat of a program that had an old guy running it. So it's like, I don't think you're downgrading or running any risk there because that's kind of what they were already in bed with for the last few years. Now, I think that too much has been made about, like, does Bill Belichick want to recruit or do those types of things? Like, recruiting is not what it used to be. Like, let's just call it what it is. Like, Kirby Smart, I don't think, maybe he's done 1 or 2 home visits since I've started covering Georgia for Dogs 24/7. But head coaches going on the road and doing home visits is not a common occurrence. He might have to be going around the state of North Carolina on his helicopter in the spring, showing some face, doing some things like that. But I don't think you're going to be seeing Bill Belichick on the road a ton, because that's just not what head coaches are doing in recruiting nowadays. I do think that he has the ability to sell some things that people are going to buy. Like, he's going to have relationships in the NFL that I think for a 3-star recruit that he evaluates and thinks is a really, really good football player, he's going to be able to look at them and say, hey, if you go somewhere else, you're not guaranteed to necessarily get looks from the NFL. I think that Bill Belichick is going to have a lot of 3-star recruits, low 4-star guys that he's evaluating and he believes in his evaluation on, that he is going to sell to and be right that he can get them to the NFL better than others can, if not just because of their playing ability, but also his connections within the league. I see Kipp shaking his head. I firmly believe this. I also think college football head coaching now, like when it comes to how you manage your roster, a big portion of it, let's just call it what it is what is your NIL budget and what is everybody going to be asking for? A lot of college coaches were not prepared for this world. They don't have the background, the expertise to be able to handle these types of things. Who does have that is someone that was an NFL GM. And so I do think that Bill Belichick's ability to manage money and roster is going to be better than 98% of the people that are also in college football right now as college football head coaches. Now, does that guarantee you a good roster? Does that mean that North Carolina is going to become a big-time program? No, I'll admit, I thought he was posturing the North Carolina job to try and get a bigger college job. Like, I thought he might try and wait around and see if an Ohio State opens or something like that, because I think that becomes infinitely more easier from a recruiting standpoint, because then the place just sort of sells itself. Now he's trying to have to kind of build the platform for what the program is, which goes a little bit beyond what I would have thought Bill Belichick would want to step into.
I'm going to say this is not going to work. And the biggest thing is a big part of the reason, as a fellow Falcons fan like Kipp, that I didn't want Bill becoming the Falcons head coach is because he's going to bring on all his cronies and they are all going to come. Michael Lombardi has already been announced as the GM. What a shame that the Ringer is going to lose Michael Lombardi, because that's where he's at his best. We do not need him managing a college football roster. But, now you wonder about Matt Patricia. I think they've got it in the deal, if I'm not mistaken, that Steve Belichick is going to replace Bill at North Carolina. If you told me it was just Bill, I'd say, okay, this could work. Now, again, I'm saying it would work in the fact of like North Carolina 8-4, 9-3, maybe 10-2 every once in a while. I don't want all the baggage that comes with Bill Belichick. All those other guys, the hangers-on, some who have had success, most who have not, without Bill, I just don't think that's worth it. And to throw him in to a new level of sports, I really thought, Ben talked about him posturing to maybe get a bigger college job. I thought he was posturing to like, hey, the Jaguars, we're going to fire Doug Peterson, because if we don't, we're not going to get our chance to hire Bill Belichick and give him an NFL quarterback in Trevor Lawrence and some good pieces to work with. I just don't see this working. I've seen a lot of people compare this to Bill Walsh going to Stanford in the 90s. I think it's going to look a lot like that.
He wasn't a good GM. He did not evaluate well. That's why the Patriots are still in shambles. That roster was just gutted by all those awful draft picks. And now he's going to have a 2028 kid trying to go into his office every day and meet him when he's on to TCU right now. I don't see him having the time for the day-to-day minutia that recruiting is. I mean, do you think he's going to have other people handling his social media? He just got Instagram like a couple months ago, and I doubt he handles that. It's going to be up to all the other people in that program, and he's going to bring in people that were used to running the Patriots. So he might have the salary cap down, but I just don't think his evals are going to work. I don't think spring recruiting is going to work. I don't think just having to talk to kids every single day is going to work. And I don't think that he is prepared for how much day-to-day effort has to go into running a college football program, even in NIL, maybe even more so, because these guys they're going to want to leave if they're not getting what they want. And in the NFL, it was like, he never worried about things like that. They already had their contracts. They had their guys locked in, and it's just a different landscape right now. So I think he's set up horribly for disaster. And I think that North Carolina made a deal that they're going to regret very quickly, probably within the next year. But you know what? I do hope they make a bowl game, but a very specific one. I need this man to be covered in mayo a year from now. That is the only thing that I want right now, is him in that Mayo Bowl. So if that happens, then I think the sport of college football is better for having Bill Belichick, even if only for a little while.
I do think it's crazy that, for all of the college coaches jump into the NFL, and why would anyone want to be coaching in college this day and age, that Bill Belichick, of all the people, is the one that decided to make the jump from the NFL back to college. And, I get where you're coming from, Kipp. It's not that I don't. I just think that Bill Belichick's thought about like the recruiting minutia and all this nonsense that goes on with having to have these conversations in his office with 18 and 19-year-olds who want to get, $20,000 more or whatever it might be. Like, he had to have thought of all of these things before making this decision, you would think. And he works like 90 TV jobs right now, so it's not like he's in need of the money.
You called it a jump. He got pushed.
Well, yeah.
Jordan has talked about him trying to get another gig or trying to get the Jacksonville job, or how to say. No one else called. This was his best offer, and he took it almost immediately. There were no other visits. There were no other rumors. What other programs, college or NFL, were knocking down his door? They just said, go out to pasture. We've seen all that you have to offer. You're done. And North Carolina was like, well, this is the same thing for us. We're going to just go right back into this. So I just think that they had an opportunity to actually just get their program back on track or on a track, and they just decided let's stay off the rails for the foreseeable future. And I just think this is going to be a complete train wreck. But you know what? If it involves Belichick, I'm okay with that.
I'm going to be following. I wish I could have found the quote because I am bummed because it came to mind that there was a quote when this deal was getting done that essentially Belichick was done with like the stupidness of the NFL or something like that. Brother, you have not been watching college football for the last, I mean, pretty much its whole existence, but at least the last 5 years. You're worried about how dumb the NFL is. Get ready for quite a surprise in Chapel Hill. But I will say this. I'm going to watch the introductory press conference. I want to see what Belichick says, and I'll have to see ACC Media Days. That might be worth a trip to Charlotte. That might be worth seeing what Bill's able to do in front of all those cameras. All right, we're going to end the episode there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. I appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to go to dogs247.com. Go to our YouTube, subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Go to our Instagram, go to our TikTok. Busy time of year. I'm going to have a transfer portal story shortly after we're done recording on Thursday. I would encourage you guys to keep an eye on that. A lot of good intel, a lot of good stuff. And Ben's already looking at 2026 in the recruiting rankings and the recruits that Georgia's reaching out to. So you know how quickly the page turns there. Be on the lookout for content on the YouTube. All the interviews that we'll have leading up to the Sugar Bowl, Georgia men's basketball, hoping to be there at that game on Saturday night. Should be a good one between Georgia and Grand Canyon. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.